This region here seems to be the key. If the regiment moved along the coast,
but the archives suggest otherwise.
then we must... The reports from Normandy confirm our suspicions. Then we must advance the 3rd Division. But the weather is still holding us back. We have no...
Imagine this. A dead man washes ashore on the coast of Spain. In his pocket are secret British military documents revealing the Allies' next invasion plan. German intelligence secretly copies every page before returning the documents, believing they have uncovered one of the greatest intelligence victories of the Second World War. Weeks later, thousands of Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Sicily. But something is wrong. The German defenses are far weaker than expected. Hitler had moved many of his best troops somewhere else. One dead man had helped change the course of the war. The strangest part? That man never existed. This was Operation Mincemeat, one of the most daring deception missions ever attempted. To understand why Britain would risk such an unbelievable plan, we have to go back to the spring of 1943. The Second World War had reached a turning point. The Allies had finally forced Axis forces out of North Africa after months of brutal fighting. It was a major victory, but everyone knew the hardest battles were still ahead. The next step was obvious. If the Allies wanted to invade mainland Europe, they first needed control of the Mediterranean. Standing directly in their way was the island of Sicily. Located between North Africa and Italy, Sicily was the perfect launching point for an invasion of southern Europe. Whoever controlled the island controlled one of the most important crossroads of the war. The Allied High Command agreed. Sicily would be the next target. But there was one enormous problem. The Germans knew it too. To Hitler and his generals, Sicily was the most logical place for an invasion. The distance from North Africa was short. The island was strategically vital, and losing it would expose Italy itself. As a result, German commanders heavily reinforced the island. Thousands of soldiers were stationed there. Coastal defenses stretched across the beaches. Artillery batteries overlooked likely landing zones. Airfields housed fighters ready to attack any invasion fleet. The moment Allied ships appeared on the horizon, they would be met with overwhelming force. Military planners feared the invasion could become a disaster. Even if the Allies eventually captured Sicily, the cost could be catastrophic. Tens of thousands of soldiers might die before they ever secured a beachhead. British intelligence realized something unsettling. They didn't just need a better battle plan. They needed the Germans to prepare for the wrong battle. If Hitler could be convinced that the invasion would happen somewhere else, he would be forced to move troops away from Sicily. Every division transferred out of Sicily could save thousands of Allied lives. The challenge was figuring out how to deceive one of the most suspicious military machines in history. Fake radio messages? The Germans intercepted countless transmissions every day and knew many were planted. Double agents? Too risky. Forged reports? Too easy to question. The deception had to feel accidental. It had to be something the Germans believed they had discovered themselves. That was when British intelligence revisited an unusual idea buried inside an obscure military memo. The proposal sounded almost ridiculous. What if the enemy discovered secret invasion plans on the body of a dead British officer? Not a spy, not someone trying to deliver information, simply a victim of circumstance, a military courier whose aircraft had supposedly crashed into the sea while carrying highly classified documents. If the body drifted ashore in neutral Spain, local authorities would recover it. British officials expected German intelligence to secretly examine everything before returning it. If every detail looked authentic, the Germans might accept the documents as genuine. The concept sounded less like military strategy and more like the plot of a detective novel. Even experienced intelligence officers questioned whether anyone would believe such an elaborate story. Yet the more they examined the idea, the more convincing it became. People often trust information they think they've stolen far more than information handed directly to them. Instead of feeding Germany a lie, Britain would allow Germany to discover one. There was only one problem left. The operation needed someone to play the role of the dead officer, someone who would never tell the truth, someone who could carry Britain's greatest secret. And that meant British intelligence had to begin an extraordinary search. Not for a soldier, not for a volunteer, but for the perfect corpse. Finding a body was only the beginning. The real challenge was convincing the Nazis that this dead man had once been a living British officer. Every detail had to withstand intense scrutiny. If even one piece of the story looked suspicious, the entire operation would collapse. British intelligence eventually found a suitable body, a man who had died from natural causes. His death offered an opportunity that, while tragic, could serve a far greater purpose. His real identity would remain secret. Instead, he would become someone entirely new. His name was Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. On paper, he was an ordinary officer, but ordinary was exactly what made him believable. The planners understood something essential about deception. Real people are messy. They lose receipts. They carry old letters. They forget to empty their pockets. So William Martin couldn't look like a fictional hero. He had to look like someone who had simply lived his life. The intelligence team carefully built his identity piece by piece. They placed official military identification in his wallet. They added theater ticket stubs that had already been used. A bank statement suggested he was slightly overdrawn. There were keys with no obvious explanation, a packet of cigarettes, a book of matches, small items that most people wouldn't notice, but investigators certainly would. Then came the personal touches. Inside his pockets were love letters from a woman named Pam. There was a photograph of her, smiling warmly into the camera. The letters were affectionate, playful, and completely believable. To anyone reading them, William Martin wasn't just an officer. He was a fiancé looking forward to returning home. His wallet even contained bills and receipts that hinted at an ordinary life filled with everyday concerns. Nothing appeared staged. Nothing looked perfect. That was the point. Perfection would have raised suspicion. Imperfection created authenticity. But none of these items were the true objective. Hidden inside a locked briefcase, handcuffed securely to the officer's wrist, were several highly classified military letters. These documents appeared to reveal the Allies' next major invasion. According to the letters, Sicily was merely a distraction. The real attacks would fall on Greece and the island of Sardinia. The information was exactly what German commanders hoped to discover. It confirmed their own fears while steering them toward the wrong conclusion. The documents were written with extraordinary care. They didn't sound like obvious deception. Instead, they included casual remarks, minor administrative details, and subtle references that made them feel genuine. Every sentence was designed to appear natural. The goal wasn't to convince the Germans that Britain wanted them to believe something. The goal was to make them think they had uncovered Britain's most closely guarded secret. Now only one step remained. The body had to reach enemy hands, but not directly. If the British simply delivered it, the deception would fail immediately. Instead, they needed circumstances that looked entirely accidental. In late April 1943, the submarine HMS Seraph quietly slipped through the waters toward the southern coast of Spain. Spain was officially neutral during the war. However, British intelligence knew that German agents operated there extensively and maintained close relationships with local officials. If the body washed ashore in the right location, there was an excellent chance German intelligence would secretly inspect everything before the documents were returned to Britain. Before dawn, the crew carefully prepared the body. A life jacket was secured. The briefcase was fastened to William Martin's wrist. Final checks were made to ensure every detail matched the story they had created. Then, in complete silence, the body was released into the sea. From that moment on, the operation was beyond British control. The tides would decide where the body landed. Local authorities would decide how it was handled. German intelligence would decide whether to investigate. Weeks of meticulous planning now depended on chance. The waiting began. Every day felt longer than the last. Then word finally arrived. A British officer had indeed been found on a Spanish beach. The documents had been recovered. Eventually, they were returned through official diplomatic channels. At first glance, everything seemed untouched. The envelopes were sealed. The letters were inside. But British experts noticed tiny signs that someone had opened them with great care before sealing them again. Someone had read every page. Now came the most terrifying question of all. Had the Germans believed the lie? Or had they just uncovered the greatest deception attempt of the entire war? For days, British intelligence heard nothing. No messages, no confirmation, no indication that the operation had succeeded or failed. The men who had spent months planning Operation Mincemeat could do nothing except wait. Then the first clues began to appear. British codebreakers, listening to encrypted German communications, noticed something unusual. German commanders were discussing the possibility that the main Allied invasion would strike Greece and Sardinia. The exact story contained in the forged documents was now appearing in genuine German military messages. It was the first sign that the deception was working. As more intercepted communications arrived, the picture became even clearer. Hitler had accepted the documents as authentic. To him, the papers found on the dead British officer confirmed what he already feared, that Sicily was only a diversion. The real invasion, he believed, was coming somewhere else. His response was immediate. Additional troops were sent to Greece. Armored divisions were repositioned. Aircraft were redirected. Defensive preparations expanded across the eastern Mediterranean. Every soldier moved away from Sicily made the island just a little more vulnerable. It was exactly what the Allies had hoped for. Then came the moment everything had been leading toward. On July 10, 1943, thousands of Allied soldiers crossed the Mediterranean and landed on the beaches of Sicily. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, had begun. Although fierce fighting still followed, the German and Italian defenders were not as strong as Allied commanders had feared. Many experienced units had already been moved elsewhere. The deception had not eliminated resistance, but it had weakened it. Those missing divisions could have turned the invasion into a bloodbath. Instead, the Allies established beachheads, pushed inland, and gradually secured the island. The victory opened the door to mainland Italy. Only weeks later, Benito Mussolini's regime collapsed. For the first time since the war began, one of Germany's major allies was falling apart. Operation Mincemeat was not the only reason for these events. Wars are never won by a single plan. They are shaped by thousands of decisions, battles, and sacrifices. But historians widely agree that the deception achieved exactly what it was designed to do. It convinced German leaders to make strategic decisions based on false information at one of the most critical moments of the war. Perhaps the greatest success of the operation was that the Germans never realized they had been deceived. Even after the invasion of Sicily, many German commanders continued believing that Greece had been the true target, and that the landing in Sicily was simply one part of a larger Allied strategy. The lie had become stronger than the truth itself. For decades, much of the operation remained classified. The identity of the man whose body carried Britain's greatest secret was known only to a handful of officials. Eventually, the world learned his real name. He was not Major William Martin. That officer had never existed. The man was Glyndwr Michael, a civilian from Wales whose life had been marked by hardship and anonymity. In death, however, he became part of one of the most remarkable intelligence operations in history. He never fired a weapon. He never commanded soldiers. He never saw the victory that followed. Yet his final role helped protect thousands of Allied troops and contributed to one of the most successful deception campaigns ever carried out. Operation Mincemeat proved that wars are not won by strength alone. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is a story convincing enough for an enemy to believe. And in 1943, one carefully crafted lie helped change the course of World War II.